Thank you all for joining us. I'm very excited to introduce and speak with Briana Paxton. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. She is wonderful. I want to just note, for those of you who may or may not have used Zoom webinar before, if you have a chat, if you have a question for Briana at any point, please put it into the Q&A box, and I will get to the questions as soon as we have some introduction, we lay some groundwork with Briana, and then we can go through any participant questions as needed. So we're looking forward to your questions. Please do not hesitate to send them along. And with that, I want to introduce our Coffee with an Expert participant for the month of June. Briana Paxton. As a quick bio, Briana is a historic preservation professional, housing advocate, and small-scale developer based in Savannah, Georgia. For her day job, she works remotely as a revitalization policy analyst for Preservation Maryland, where she actively researches, develops, and advocates for policy innovations and regulatory systems that promote equitable and sustainable development. She previously worked in the private sector as a consultant with Ethos Preservation and PlaceEconomics. Briana serves as the Chairwoman of Preservation Action, leading national efforts to secure sound federal preservation policy, and is a former board member for the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. She holds a master's in historic preservation from the University of Pennsylvania and a bachelor's from the College of William and Mary. I also want to apologize. I am at my office and there seems to be a considerable amount of construction today and only today. So please excuse me, and we'll focus on our wonderful speakers. So Briana, thank you so much for speaking with us and being with us, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. It's a great introduction.
I would love to start with just if you could tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, and what got you into this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I have been in Savannah, Georgia since 2018, but I grew up in Virginia, and I have evolved a bit in my career. When I went to undergrad, I really thought that I wanted to be a planner in an old town because I had grown up in a historic town in Virginia. Went off to grad school at the University of Pennsylvania, wanting to learn more. And I really thought I was going to be a planner in an old town somewhere across the US, and was excited to figure out where that would land me. But I ended up hitting it off and really connecting with one of my graduate school professors, Donovan Ripkema, who had founded PlaceEconomics, which is a consulting firm that works at the intersection of economics and historic preservation. And the summer after I graduated, he'd called me and said, "Hey, I have a project in North Carolina. I need help on it. I'm not sure how long I can keep you employed, but like I need help this fall." And I was like, "Sure." I hadn't found a job yet. And that turned into 8 years of working at PlaceEconomics, which took me all over the country, sometimes internationally, to work on assignments, trying to come up with different ways of measuring the economic value of historic resources, come up with incentives for historic resources, and oftentimes measuring like the quality of life and social benefits of, keeping old stuff around. What does it mean to have these old buildings preserved and utilized in the everyday versus, newer buildings. But in 2019, I had my daughter, and at that point I was like, man, it's a little complicated to like have a toddler and be traveling. So I switched to a local firm, Ethos Preservation here in Savannah, worked with them for a few years, and in 2024 switched to working with Preservation Maryland, which they were so kind to allow me to do this role remotely. They had wanted someone full-time in person in Baltimore, but it's a life lesson that if you see a job that you think you really want to do, it never hurts to write your cover letter really truthfully and saying that, you can only work part-time remotely, but you'd really like to have a conversation with them. And it worked. So I have kind of carved out my life now where I'm doing kind of half of my days, half my hours during the week, doing smart growth research and content development for Preservation Maryland. So what does that mean? That means we're looking at development patterns, land conservation patterns. Maryland is the 9th smallest state. And so they, as a state, are really concerned about how they develop. And it's really putting a lot of pressure back on communities to reinvest in their historic communities, revitalize the upper floors of their Main Street buildings. So I get to write a lot of blogs, do some research. This week I'm working on religious owned properties throughout Maryland and how they could help contribute to the housing crisis. So I'm literally trying to answer a GIS question of how many acres of land in Maryland are owned by religious institutions and how much of that could be zoned for housing and how much of that already has buildings on it that could be adaptive reused as housing. So that's my question this week.
What a question.
Which is fun. It leads me down a lot of rabbit holes. Sometimes they don't go anywhere, but I'm hopeful I can have enough information to answer those questions this week. But I say that I do that part-time because I intentionally carved out other space in my life to work here in Savannah locally. I have found throughout my career that when I was at PlaceEconomics and traveling all over the country, it was really great. I was working in Nashville and LA and New York and Chicago, and it felt like I didn't have time to contribute to the preservation happening in my own community. So that's why I have carved out space to like have headspace to think about Savannah and my own neighborhood. So that has led me to become a small scale developer in my own neighborhood. So a few years ago, I bought a building 3 blocks down the street that was vacant. I walked past it every day during COVID and was like, what's happening with this little 1-story commercial building, near my house? And I found a partner and we rehabbed it using historic tax credits and several other local incentives. And we now have 3 small businesses, a corner bodega store, a plant store, and a bookstore that all moved in, that are all doing well. And that has been really fruitful to be a hyper local developer, almost the type of people that I was studying their work when I was working at PlaceEconomics. But now I get to be that person, which is really helpful and fruitful. So I'm still looking for more development opportunities, but in the meantime, I have been partnering as a consultant with other people doing development, helping them do historic tax credits or writing grants for other groups, and also have a little bit of work helping as a sub with other consulting firms across the country, just doing analysis and research. So I helped the planning collaborative in Jacksonville, Florida, on a small scale project for a neighborhood called Durkeeville there. But I think I like this, half time. It means I have a lot of projects going on at once, but it means I can kind of pick and choose which projects I get excited about and jump into, and being able to have that flexibility in my schedule to say yes to a friend, who's like, hey, we're doing a project in so-and-so in Durham, and we'd like to add you on to the team. It's been really nice to have that flexibility.
That's fantastic. I mean, you're so busy. You're doing all
Too
of it.
busy. I really need to learn how to say no to things.
I think that's a common problem.
Though that's all my paid work. And then
You're doing a lot of volunteer work too. Yeah.
Volunteer hat. So at some point in time along my career, when I was working at PlaceEconomics, I followed my then husband to his PhD program in Muncie, Indiana. And while I was living in Indiana, I met a bunch of preservationists working in Indiana. And one of them was Marsh Davis, who ran Indiana Landmarks, which is their statewide nonprofit in Indiana that advocates for historic preservation. And he at the time was board chair for Preservation Action, and he recruited me to be on the membership committee. And then I kept offering to do things, and then they were like, hey, will you be the next chair? And it was one of those, like, I didn't step back fast enough, and suddenly at 20 almost 30 years of age, I was board chair for a national nonprofit, which to me was kind of crazy. But now I'm so thankful for that opportunity that, we have a lot of great um, multi-generational folks on the board. So there's young people like me who don't have much money, but I've got
Mm,
time and energy to put in, and older folks on the board who, have had long careers and are very experienced at running nonprofits that help advise us. So Preservation Action is a 501c4 lobbying
mhm,
group for historic preservation. So we've had a very busy year this year trying to advocate for preservation funding, the historic tax credits in the US, as well as making sure, existing grant programs aren't canceled. So there's a lot of work going on to make sure that, work happening at the local level is being shared with our members of Congress and the administration to understand how, them making a decision in Washington, D.C., like how it comes back down the chain
mm,
and
mhm,
impacts these local communities. But the work with Preservation Action, I think is really fun, which is why I'm still at it. And I have a really great group of board members who are all remote, all across the country. We just work on Zoom to do our work. We have 3 staff who all work remote as well. Um, One's in Arlington, one's in Ohio, and our president, Russ Carnahan, lives in St. Louis still, and he's a former member of Congress, so he brings
mm.
great perspective of, members of Congress are drinking from a fire hose, trying to understand all these issues that
Yes,
their constituents are bringing to them. So how do we make preservation stand out from all those other issues that are going on?
that's great. And there's so many questions I want to come back to you on.
Yeah.
Um, I just wanted to, you're involved in so many things, and I love the fact that you have this sort of multi-generational touch, that
Hmm.
you are someone who is still, even though you've done so much, you're not like at the end of your career,
Hmm.
and you're involved in so many things. You've got this fantastic perspective that is both hyper local and national, interfacing with federal policy and translating that to the local level. That's just such a great breadth of experience to bring, and with that all in mind, sort of taking a step back, uh, and looking at sort of this range of moving pieces.
Hmm.
If you see someone who, and this is an emerging professional, coffee chat, how what would you describe as that connection between sort of the federal national level, the sort of state level, and the local level, and how these pieces all play together?
Hmm. Hmm. They say that preservation is all local, and I think that is so true even in today's environment where, the folks that are working at the federal level, even if they're in a federal agency, they don't always know the latest of like what's happening, in Savannah, Georgia, or in Texas, or, wherever you are located. So, I really feel like it's our job as local preservation advocates to be communicating that information back up the chain. And, one thing we've been looking at is the federal budget is happening right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And we have a problem where the funds that were appropriated last year for all the federal grant programs and staffing for our SHPO offices who help process all of those applications and all the
mm,
federal reviews and all the tax credits, that money hasn't gone out the door as it should have. So we've been sending a barrage of letters, and trying to get people in positions of power to understand, something's not functioning in the system. We need you to use your voice to, make it happen, please.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So that has been really great to see small business owners write letters about
mm,
how they, are having their projects slowed down because of this delay in funding. And the second panic that we've been working on is, funding for next year. Next year is America's 250.
mm-hmm,
Lots of communities across the country are getting ready to do storytelling and events and commemorative, lots of stuff is happening. And one of the main sources of funding for that is the HPF. And the president's budget had basically zeroed that out. Now, that doesn't mean that that is going to happen. There's a whole committee called the Appropriations Committee in Congress, which appropriates those funds. But we as preservationists have to be able to communicate back up of
Mm-hmm.
how we are using those funds or could be using those funds. And I do find right now in Congress, there's so much happening that members of Congress really are listening to their constituents who are saying,
Mm.
hey, we really, this is really important to us. So, if you have a grant project you're working on, you have a site that could be eligible for one of the competitive Park Service grants, African American civil rights, the semi-quincentennial grants, and you're gearing up to apply for that, that would be something to let your elected officials know, even at the
Mm-hmm.
local level, like letting your mayor know, hey, we are really concerned that these funds aren't going to be there next year, and we're really counting on them to fix up, this site in our community. Um, One of my preservation action colleagues, um, Hannah in Philadelphia, helped work things so that the city of Philadelphia actually recently passed a resolution calling for the release of those funds so that they could appropriately celebrate America's 250 in Philadelphia next year. So even at the local level, you could still have a voice that can be translated up. So I encourage you all to get very good at storytelling and being able to have an elevator pitch of why you need whatever you need, and get comfortable with sharing that in an assertive manner.
Mm. That's actually a great segue into a question here, which is, can you describe some of those sort of technical, soft skills, but also technical skills that you employ with your work?
Mm-hmm.
And if there are any sort of emerging technologies that you found are becoming more part of your work or are phasing out of your work,
Mm-hmm.
and just I want to come back to this, grounding in the get good at storytelling and the elevator pitch, and if you can also just share what you think makes a really good story, what makes a good elevator pitch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in terms of hard technical skills, I mean, being able to like research and analyze and then synthesize is something that I do on a daily basis. Certainly with the introduction of AI in today, it's interesting to see that come through some people's work. And I do use AI occasionally, typically to like rewrite things or to
Hmm.
synthesize. Like I'll write something and then be like, man, I used way too many words. Like, can you help pare this down?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't use it on a daily basis. I do use GIS software on a daily basis, and that was something I had learned actually in undergrad, and that translated into grad school where you sometimes are, making a site map and you need to be able to, show it across this historic site, all of these different layers. So GIS is really helpful, even through ArcGIS, but I typically just use QGIS, which is the open
Hmm.
source software right now that does well. Another hard skill is definitely just remote work and being able to use Google Drive, Teams, whatever, and being proficient at that. Just like working in a document with a colleague who might be states away at the same time, which leads to soft skills of being able to communicate, when you can't just like pick up, what you're working on, pick up your computer and go talk to your colleague about like, hey, I really think you wrote this sentence like totally backwards and we need to
Hmm.
fix it,
Hmm.
right? How do you do that in a chat function? So I think communication style, and I've certainly done a lot of reading. I read a book about the history of emotional labor. I don't remember the author. I'd have to Google it, but it has an
This is a
orange
fascinating
cover.
title, though. My gosh.
But that really struck me about the way females communicate in the workplace compared to how males communicate in the workforce. And it has really led me to trying to communicate in a more assertive manner and, don't apologize at the front of your email necessarily. be like, sorry, I was delayed. It's like, just don't worry about it. It's like, thanks for your patience, and get to whatever you're saying. So there's just like little tricks that will make you come across in a more confident manner, which of
Hmm.
course will help people respect you more, no matter your age, right? If you're a good communicator and you're a confident presenter, then you can get a lot of things done versus someone who's um, communicating in a less assertive manner, more passive manner. So yeah, I would say communication styles is definitely something to brush up on, and watch YouTube videos and read books to definitely hold yourself accountable and hold your colleagues accountable too. If they're communicating in a passive aggressive way, it's like, well, let's just talk about it.
Mhm.
So yeah, I feel like the remote communication and remote work has been a big thing that I've had to learn on the job. That was not something I was taught in school. But what makes a good storytelling? I actually had to do a lot of research on that in the past year, because last year I was selected to do a TEDx talk in Savannah.
Mhm.
And I had done debate team and oratory competitions in high school, so I was already pretty comfortable with public speaking, but TEDx was like a very specific pitch that they want you to make to really, invoke feelings out of people and have a good, takeaway message that people should listen to your TEDx talk and walk away feeling like ready to, do whatever you ask them to do. So I love to do a 4-part like storytelling, which I actually have kept on the back of an envelope
I
on
love
my
it.
wall.
Literally
But
back of the envelope.
yes, but I frequently am like sitting here at my desk writing and like look up to make sure that
Mm.
I'm following. But the first is to share the context of what you're trying to describe. So why, to be able to answer like, why should your audience care about whatever
Mhm.
you're talking about? The second is to provide conflict, and that is to make the audience feel what you're feeling. So
Mm.
if you're writing about, when I was doing my TEDx, I was writing about redlining. And so I used archival evidence to show how discriminatory and inflammatory those redlining documents were, and just how racist they were, written in
Mm.
plain language, and being able to show the archival documents of like, here's a document in the Library of Congress online. This is literally what those surveyors had written down, and what these communities, the discrimination these communities were feeling like, this is what they were faced with. And to provide details to fuel those feelings. The third is highlighting your outcome. So like, what is the result of the action taken? Like, what do you
Mm.
want the audience to do? And the fourth, of course, is like kind of wrapping it up with a bow with the takeaway. So, what's the overall theme or message you're trying to get it across? But also, what happens is if nothing is done. And I feel like this takeaway message has really helped me in my grant writing. Over the last few years, I've done had the opportunity to write grants for religious institutions. I don't really know how, just through a mentor, I got connected with Partners for Sacred Places, and I helped
Mm.
author a federal grant for them. And this past year, I authored a federal grant for the oldest church in Philadelphia, which was a great honor, and really got into it. But, I've really had to explain, if we don't get this money to fix up this church, like, here's what's going to happen. And you got to be
Mm.
able, in whatever sort of writing, even if it's just technical report writing, to be able to have a good ending message to convince your audience, of what you want them. So I love that 4-part thing.
That's a great 4 part, and I think that's also great because you can scale that to whatever time you have. If you need,
Right.
I need a 1 or 2 minute elevator pitch, or I'm speaking for 15 minutes, or I'm being interviewed. I think that's a great framework to have, and that actually segues into one of the audience questions we've gotten is, can you speak about some, actual projects you've worked on, currently or in the past, and how you might have had to sort of rally the preservationists to change the course of a proposal that might not have been sort of preservation sensitive, or when you've had to sort of influence the outcome based on your knowledge and your sort of storytelling in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope
Mm-hmm.
I'm interpreting the correct question correctly. Please let me know if I'm not.
Yeah. I definitely see the there's been a big push in preservation over the last 10 years to, add more stories and more voices, right? And I had the opportunity a year or two ago to work on the African American context statement for the state of Georgia, which they'd had one from like the late 80s. And so they had federal funding to update that African American context statement, which was this was through Ethos Preservation, the local consulting firm I was working for here in Savannah. And so my colleagues and I were basically tasked with telling the entire African American story from 1526 through 1980, I think, was our cutoff. And then what are the resources that are indicative of that African American experience? And we're a all white lady firm. So we kind of started off knowing, we need to have an advisory board of people who have lived experience and family experience in saving African American places. So we were able to get a statewide advisory board, trying to like make sure we had folks from each region who were kind of like the local historians and local preservationists for Black heritage in their area. But we had to do a lot of, this is a state-funded project. There's certain level of documentation that they were expecting. And we also had a online form where people could crowdsource stories, where people could, submit on our Google form of like, oh, here's pictures of my grandmother's farm, and this is my family story about our farm that we've had for 3 generations. And there was a lot of back and forth about being able to count those more organic stories in the document, because the reviewers and the client were looking for, peer-reviewed journal articles. And that doesn't always exist on Black farmers in Georgia and chicken coops and sweet potato houses. Like, who has written about sweet potato houses? Not many people. So we, as the authors of the report, really had to do a lot to massage and be able to kind of thread that needle of like, these people's experiences and their history is valid. They have shared it with us. That enough should count. But that was a time where I definitely was feeling a little defeated sometimes throughout that process of just trying to make sure that we're standing up for, this, the history that we were trying to tell and making it fit the system of, this specific project that had specific standards that had to be met. And so I have run into that in different facets of my career, where it's kind of like the grassroots power versus like the institutionalized power. And you sometimes need to be able to speak both languages, and help people understand how they could use the system, but also help people who are already in institutionalized positions of power understand how their actions are maybe negatively affecting the grassroots stories. So yeah, the Georgia's Full Story Project is the thing to Google. That's the document that we came up with. But I'm actually still in touch with some of the community members that we crowdsource stories from. One girl is an artist and still helps her dad on their family farm. And she does these great collages, sharing her family's like farming story. And one thing that she shared with us that was important to her, but I never would have thought it would be important, is that they had like a dinner bell on her grandmother's farm. And it was just like, 5 feet tall on a post, and they would ring it when, it was time for everybody to come in and eat. But when you're thinking about an agricultural landscape, I was never thinking that the bell would be like the thing that was like really important. But she was like, no, that was like, I really want that preserved. Like that should be written in this report, that we had a dinner bell on our farm. So sometimes you have to be very open and willing to be like, oh, but the house or the sweet potato shack is like indicative of this. But sometimes it's small things that are the meaningful piece of the landscape to different people.
Yeah, so just being flexible to the information that you're getting, sort of being willing to pivot, even if it's not the story you thought you were going to come into.
Yes.
Picking up on those small pieces and exploring that as an avenue of something new or different, or more importantly, meaningful to the community that's actually living in this area. I'm curious, when you said that you have felt defeated in several times in your career in terms of sort of making the history that you're seeing at a more grassroots level fit a larger system, and these institutional systems where it's very codified, it's very strict, there are a lot of policies that are in place. Do the frustration come from convincing each of these different entities that they must work together to a certain degree, or is it the lobbying aspect of it? Or I'm curious what you find to be the challenge. And then I think taking a sort of a wider lens in your experience, do you find that there are sort of persistent challenges in this field that you hope will be remedied in the future?
I mean, I think the benefit of, being historians of the built environment is that we connect all these dots, right? Of, this building or this neighborhood looks this way because of these certain factors that happened in history. And most people operating in the world don't have that lens. So I really came across that in my TEDx research, which I specifically researched redlining and zoning and the link between single family only zoning and redlining, and linked it to our wealth equity gap and housing crisis that we have going on right now. And this belief that single family home ownership in a detached home, of which there's so many historic, beautiful historic neighborhoods that are single family homes, right? But if you look at many of those historic neighborhoods, they're not actually all single family only. Like some of them, it's the big house, but it's been split up into apartments in a sensitive manner, or they have a carriage house in the lane that has an apartment on top. And those are important for us as historians and preservationists to preserve. But I'm also right now with my job in Maryland working in a space where I'm advocating for zoning reform so that we could rebuild those types of neighborhoods. Because in many places, the current zoning laws don't allow you to do that. And I think it's been really interesting to run into these emotions that people have with single family home ownership, that, it's the American dream and everybody deserves that. Well, we know from the housing crisis and being young people trying to afford housing that it's maybe not in the cards, right? Like you might be buying a condo in a building with other condos, and that's home ownership for you. But can we even build those condos? Or if that condo is in a historic district and it burns down, could you rebuild it? So I think I've been frustrated because a lot of this is like, if it's already in the institutionalized system, in our codes, in our guidelines, it's really hard ship to turn when you want to make changes to that. And people are scared of change because they don't see how it's going to benefit them. And as soon as you say you're going to change something, they assume it's a threat. So I think that goes back to the storytelling and being able to present your case in a manner that's non-threatening to whoever's in a position of power. So to be able to share with them, I don't think you're personally doing a terrible job, but I think I would love to tweak your rules so that your rules could say yes. And I think that's how I feel with specifically in the heritage field of us having, peer-reviewed journals only can be cited. It's not that that's bad. It's just, we know it doesn't allow for the full story. So how do we present our case to like tweak the rules so that they can say yes to our oil histories and, this lady sharing her grandmother's story, that should be valid too. So adding legitimacy to the grassroots message, I think is the way to go, and presenting it in a non-threatening manner to the powers it be.
No, I love that. And I think that's so important, right? It's just you can do all the research But if you can't tell the story, if you can't get that point across, right, it's not going to actually affect change, right? And have you found that, in the case of giving credibility to these historical narratives, these stories that are coming from communities, and trying to parlay that up to, sort of the space where policies and regulations are made, have you found that the attitudes of policymakers and those who are affecting regulations or writing the codes, have they become more open to this, or how are their sort of institutional attitudes changing? Have you seen?
I think in some instances, yes. But I would also say whoever you're approaching, and with lobbying for preservation, we often have a different message if we're meeting with Democrats versus Republicans, where the outcome might be the same of like, hey, we'd really like you to sign on to this bill, or we'd really like you to, request this funding. But the stories we tell and the parts of the story that we emphasize are a little different depending on who we're speaking to. So I think it's important to always do your homework on whoever you're presenting to, and like what's their background, what do they care about, what motivates them. And sometimes you might not get a meeting with the person that needs to be the decision maker. So you have to triangulate. You have to try to get to somebody who could speak to them on your behalf. And I've had to learn that lesson, I think, the hard way here in Savannah too, where I just me being a little white lady might not be welcome in all rooms. I'm seen as a threat, even though I'm coming trying to, do neighborhood revitalization. So I need to find a trusted member of that community that I can speak to who could relay the message, to the neighborhood association, that this revitalization project, is going to be a good thing and it's not going to force them out of their homes. And I think that works at any level of government. If you're trying to get a meeting with your mayor and can't get it scheduled, it's like, okay, well, who donated to your mayor when they got reelected? Can you get in front of one of those people? And it works very similarly, going on up. I'm sure if you guys all sat down and mapped it out, you probably know someone who knows the president. It just, you probably have those links, if you really dig.
So I want to just, I think that's a great point of like, pivoting to thinking about, sort of your, I want to almost call it like an entrepreneurial mindset of you're just able to, how to get into a room, how to talk to people, how to craft the story. You've got your fingers in so many different buckets and pies at this point. I'm curious, how have you, over the course of your career, gotten to that point where you're able to get your name out there and you're able to get it, get pulled onto projects, and for someone who might be starting out and is trying to figure out how to get an in, how have you found that you've managed that over the years?
Well, I can definitely credit my time at PlaceEconomics when I was doing consulting and running across the country. My boss did a great job of always introducing his team. And while we were kind of the behind the scenes people, and then when we'd finish up our report, he would be the person that, went and did the presentation in front of their city council or whatnot. But he always did a great job of making sure that we had interactions with the client, that we were given credit. So I think if you're in a situation where it's not that sort of team mentality of like giving people on your team the credit, then like maybe that's a red flag to be aware of in your working environment. As I've gotten older, and certainly with my real estate ventures, being able to tell people what you want to do and having that kind of front and center of like, hey, I'm looking for opportunities for blank. And just, if you in the next 6 months, one of your goals is to like get on a podcast, then be telling everybody you know about that. I've had to learn that particularly with the real estate stuff of like, hey, I'm going to be buying this property and I need financing for it. So I'm literally telling everybody, hey, I'm looking for a private lender who could lend me, $300,000 to do this project. And lo and behold, I got two different lenders to interview and was able to pick between them. So I think you just got to let the universe know what you're wanting to do,
Mhm.
which goes back to like self-assessment for you, figuring out what do you want to do. I really love the Myers-Briggs assessment. If you've ever done that, that kind of it's a series of questions and it'll tell you a bit about your personality traits. But I'm a ESTJ, which I don't remember all of what those stands for, but I am the type of person that really loves logistics and, getting from A to Z. And I don't necessarily care what happens and how each step is done. I just want to lay out the entire process and make sure this person's doing that, this person's doing that, I'm doing this, and that we have the vision. So I've just learned over time that I work best in roles where I'm an executor. Because being the visionary and the executor at the same time for me is like totally exhausting.
Hmm.
Talking with one of my friends the other day who's a graphic designer, and she has ADHD and shares that pretty openly. But that also means she's able to like hyper focus on a project and get in there really intensely. But then when her boss asks her something about something like 3 weeks down the road, she's like, I have no idea because like I've been focusing on this. So just be aware of like what you are good at and what you like to do, and try to get your life into a phase where you spend the majority of your time doing stuff that you like. I have been shifting ever so slowly to the like I'm very happy with my role right now where I'm kind of doing part-time this and part-time that, but I'm only saying yes to the things that I really enjoy. And I
Hmm.
recognize that, as an emerging professional, you need to pay the bills and you might have a job that you don't love. But can you find an outlet outside of work that you really love? Like I play ultimate frisbee on the weekends.
Love that.
Great. I just like my only job is to like show up, run hard, drink water, make sure I put on enough sunscreen. And it helps me reset. And I come back to my desk on Monday and, I've exercised all weekend and, I'm good to go. So just make sure you are looking inward and recognizing like what you like to do, what you're good at, what you need. And again, back to communication, being able to ask for what you need and being able to share with your network what you want to do.
Hmm. How do you find sources of information to stay informed of what's happening? You know, news, newsletters, or
Yeah.
podcasts. Or like, how do you kind of keep up to date with what's happening in the field?
Well, I wake up and read the news every morning while I'm drinking my coffee, which is a habit I started in college, to keep abreast of like what's happening. But I know that's not for everybody because the news is tough to stomach. Now, I listen to a bunch of podcasts. If I'm out walking, if I'm driving, I'm usually listening to a podcast. I also consume a fair amount of Instagram content these days, which usually leads me down other rabbit holes of like, oh, I found this. There's a guy who bought a skyscraper in Chicago and he's been Instagram videoing it and it's really fascinating. But that led me down a road of like, oh, let me look at his website and see what else he's done. Um, and what is he following? Um, so yeah, I would say that and LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm on, I don't do TikTok and only because I hate signing up for more things. I feel like
That's
I'm
totally
already
fair.
maxed out. I would
Are
also
there,
say like keep in touch with your colleagues over time. Like I just um, put in with a grad school classmate of mine for a project in North Carolina. We've not worked together since grad school, but me having things on my LinkedIn saying that I'm available for, short-term projects and that I'm, really like doing preservation policy development. She was like, "Hey, maybe would you be a good fit to jump onto this?" So again, put out into the universe like what you want to do and people will help make connections for you.
love that. Do you have any specific recommendations for podcasts or news that you consume, I mean, beyond just sort of the general, but like what keeps you informed and like thinking about the space and sort of the issues that you care about?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, since becoming a parent, I have done a lot of like emotional intelligence research, which I feel like has
Hmm.
helped me in my career with this like communication
Yeah, the
shift.
storytelling you're saying.
So, but I honestly, I listen to We Can Do Hard Things podcast, by
Hmm.
Abby Wambach and Glennon Doyle. I also really like the U-Turn podcast by Ashley Stahl, and she actually has a good book about career development. It's like
Hmm.
U-Turn,
Hmm.
um, because she was like a CIA analyst and then decided she didn't want to do any that anymore and started doing career coaching. And so because she's been on a journey to like figure out what she wanted to do, now she helps other people do it. But I also listen to, because I like real estate development, I listen to a lot of Bigger Pockets podcasts, which is
Hmm.
not really heritage related. But I would say two of the best heritage related podcasts I listen to would be PreserveCast, which is
Hmm.
produced by Preservation Maryland, but our CEO, Nick Redding, does a great job hosting that. They just had a recent guest, Olive, and I can't remember Olive's last name, who runs a nonprofit that helps salvage boats across the country so that
Cool.
they're not just like crushed up and put into landfills. So lots of interesting people. I also really enjoy the Tangible Remnants podcast, um, that led by an architect out of Baltimore, but she has great she has a very calm presentation manner. So if you just like need something calm to listen to, I really like that one.
Love it. We have a question that says, in places it seems that preservationists are being pitted against housing advocates.
Ooh.
What are good places to look for relevant projects? And I think also coming on to that, um, are there also, and just this is not part of the question, just my add-on, but are there any sort of non-standard or unusual places that you think preservationists can find work and sort of have those transferable skills that make them relevant?
Okay, about the affordable housing versus preservation, that is not going away anytime soon. I think that's a fight that we are going to be fighting, and we are going to be relying on the next generation of preservationists to help us communicate that. Um, And I would point to my former colleagues at PlaceEconomics. They have great research on the hidden density already in historic neighborhoods. And this relates a lot to the smart growth work that I've been doing with Preservation Maryland of just like, well, hey, we used to build this way, and then we started building in a suburban way, and lo and behold, we have a housing crisis. So one part of the solution could just be to build in this way, but also let's preserve these neighborhoods we do have and start densifying the suburbs. Um, so I would definitely look to place economics work and figure out ways that you can do similar points of analysis in your own community, even if it's just looking at the population per square mile in your historic districts versus elsewhere. There's a great consulting firm based in North Carolina called Urban 3 that does tax value per acre. And they have these stunning visuals of like, okay, what does a Walmart on the edge of town bring in versus like this four-story building in your downtown? And that is the type of information that you need to be sharing with your local elected officials. I would also encourage you to join your local YIMBY chapter. Yes, in my backyard, because our historic neighborhoods are chock full of lots of different types of housing. And again, we should be preserving that and trying to replicate that. And a lot of YIMBY chapters sometimes get like, oh no, we got to tear it down and build like a skyscraper, which might be for some communities. But again, you guys being able to demonstrate in words, pictures, numbers, how your historic neighborhoods and historic resources are what we should be emulating. to help solve our housing crisis, I think is really important. So definitely get good at that. There was a second part to your question that I didn't answer, and I forget
Oh,
what it
that's
was.
fine. That was
Okay.
not the participant question. That's not the audience question. I guess mine is, are there sort of non-traditional, non-standard areas where preservation skills, training, mentality could actually be really relevant? And so what are other places that people could look for work, for jobs, but also bringing that perspective into that line of work?
I mean, it really depends on what you want to do and what excites you
Mm.
and where you want to live. My friend Sarah Marsom has made quite a name for herself in being a historian and being involved with projects doing history work, but also telling that story through craft activism.
Mm.
So like she makes tiny Jane dolls for Jane Jacobs. She made tiny I Am Pei dolls to talk about I Am Pei. They do quilting workshops. And who knew that was like a thing in preservation? But she's made it a thing where she's going to do these workshops that are storytelling. So yeah, I mean, if you have architectural history and his public historian type skill sets that could translate into other mediums, that could certainly translate into producing video content. I think that's kind of like the next hard skill we need to learn is like video
Mm.
content and how do we do it well. I don't think that field's going away, and I think that's one where history and storytelling can really sell. Um, so I don't know who the most famous like YouTuber preservationist is, but one of you guys should start that. Um, but yeah, in terms of like doing what you want, I think I would just advise you to look inward and figure out what you like to do and try to match that up with different areas of the field that um, allow you to use those skill sets.
I know we're coming up a bit on time, but I'm curious, you've talked a lot about where the field is going and what the challenges are. I'm curious, what do you see as your long-term vision? And long-term, of course, being defined however which way you like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's your ideal goal?
I think my ideal goal would be to build myself a hyper local real estate network here in Savannah so that I could buy and rehab properties and be living off of the income of those properties. I really enjoyed the process of rehabbing a little commercial store, and now I get to be lady landlord for three awesome entrepreneurs, and I would love to like wash, rinse, repeat on that. But I'm not going to be able to live off the income from one building, but if I had 20 buildings, then maybe I could, leaving me time to like say yes to the consulting projects and the community projects that I get really excited about and really want to be involved with. Um, I've gotten quite into equitable development and how to tell that story, and that's where being a historian is good because you get to explain and connect the dots of like these opportunities were blocked and withheld and oppressed from this group of people. So, now in this day and age, we're trying to make sure that these communities have equal opportunity or more opportunity to participate in reinvesting in their community. Um, and being able to jump on projects that kind of share that grassroots story, I think is where I get a lot of fulfillment from.
And
But
it sounds like you're very good at it too. From the way you describe it, you're so methodical about your work. You are clearly so passionate, and you just have such a wide vision for all the different moving parts in an ecosystem. And so, it's I've no doubt that the long-term vision will be fulfilled for you.
we'll see. I have
Fingers
a
crossed.
5-year-old, so she's been fun to like drag around, and she'll be like, "Oh, mommy, your building's broken." I'm like, "I know, we're working to fix it." The other day,
Love
she
the
was like,
honesty.
we saw, you know, an unhoused person on the side of the road, and she was like, "Mommy, you got to build more houses. People need housing." And I was like, "All right, I've created a little housing advocate, so I'm happy about that."
Love it. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for attending. And more importantly, Briana, thank you so much for your insight, for this conversation. It's been really fun talking to you and just kind of getting a window into the way that you've been doing preservation, the way you see it. You've got such amazing experience. Would you be, potentially open to people contacting you or sort of reaching out if they want to learn
Yeah,
more?
absolutely. That's totally
Um,
fine.
if that's fine, then when we sort of when we share out the information on this webinar, we can share your contact information. But thank you so much for attending. Please keep tuned to our series for our coffee chats with an expert that we do with ICOMOS Canada and ICOMOS-USA. We alternate months, and so please stay tuned for our next coffee chat with an expert in 2 months' time. But again, Briana, thank you so much. It has been a joy, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Bye, y'all.